So here's an example of a research question. I had a student who did a paper on, he comes in, I want to talk about China's Belt Road Initiative. I'm interested in that, how it affects China, what's going on. And so in looking at it and discussing it, I say, okay, what do you really want to focus in on? And so the research aim developed that the student was interested in whether or not the Belt Road Initiative created dependency. And this student was particularly interested in Southeast Asia, right? And that was his area. And so, okay, now you go to the literature, right? You do the lit review. And the student did that. And there was some conceptual issues here. What is dependency? And how does dependency get established? Right? I mean, you have a vague idea about it, but he went in and I frequently encourage people to look for explanations. And so he found a theory of debt traps. Now, it's very important to understand this was not presented as a theory of debt traps. It was an article where an author was arguing that China's Belt Road Initiative created a debt trap, and he explained how it occurred. The word theory probably never used. Maybe it was, but probably not. And this is a big point I make. Theories come in conclusion or explanation clothing. Not they don't present as theories necessarily. But the theory of debt traps, right? A debt trap was a very specific thing, and he had a theory by an author that said, here's what happens. These countries get these projects, and the steps were simple process that the uh, projects go over budget or they produce lower than expected revenue, requiring additional debt, and that a debt balloons and eventually produces a debt trap where the country cannot pay off the debt and is beholden to China. Boom, dependency or a form of it. Okay, there's an explanation. And this was a theory that had not been applied, had not been, especially in the author had looked at a few examples, but Southeast Asia, right? The countries that the student was interested in, not so much. So here we have kind of a methodological gap, a particular methodology, that is, this application of this theory hadn't been used, and also a context gap. It hadn't been used in Southeast Asia where the student. So we got gaps, right? So the research question is a no-brainer here, right? The student comes down to, have Belt Road Initiative projects created the conditions necessary for debt traps in Southeast Asia? And by conditions necessary, the reference would be made to that particular author. And, you know, that was the focused question. And it's a question, I hope you can see that the ultimate research question usually has an answer associated with it, right? We could have a thesis statement, right? The thesis is that Belt Road Initiative projects create debt traps, right? I mean, that could be your thesis. But it's the proposed answer, right? To the general question, how does BRI create dependency, right? So now we have a more focused question, and it's one that could be answered empirically because the student said, here, what are the conditions, right? And the conditions were observable. What was what were there cost overruns in these projects? Or did revenue come in lower than expected? Was there a requirement for greater loans, right? And the point was you didn't necessarily have to have the trap, right? That was what was good about it, was you could see the process. And he ended up doing a process trace and found that no, there weren't that. China apparently chooses its projects better than that. And so the point though was this was the research question, right? And I think you see hopefully how it funnels down and how the lit review and the theoretical proposition, right? Kind of the theoretical answer to the research question plays a role here as well. And this was a very excellent paper, and I think it's one of my go-to examples, especially when we get to talking about process tracing. However, you pose the research question, then you figure out what the best methodology is to test it. because you could have gone with a more quantitative cross-sectional approach. There are a lot of different ways you can approach this. The question comes first, and it helps, as part of the question, you want a theoretical proposition about what the answer is.